Welcome to this episode of Accented Dialogues in Diaspora on Celebrating Women. Tonight, we have the awesome pleasure of speaking with fashion designer and co-founder of the label Kaarem, Kathy Minh Bach. Here with me to talk with her tonight for Accented is Viet and Nguyen, who is one of the co-founders of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network and the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Sympathizer, which is currently being adapted by HBO into a television series for 2023. Its sequel, The Committed, the best-selling short story collection, The Refugees, and the children's book, Chicken of the Sea, which was co-written with his son, Allison. Please give Viet and, cut. Welcome, Viet and Kathy, back to Accented. Kathy, welcome.
Hey, Kathy, it's such a pleasure to talk to you today. You've started this brand called Kaarem, which brings a smile to my face because I think it has a meaning in Vietnamese that people who don't speak Vietnamese may not be aware of. Now, it's a fashion brand. You are a fashion designer, but you've called it Kaarem. So maybe for our non-Vietnamese listeners out there, you can explain what Kaarem means.
Yeah, so Kaarem is my parents' generation of what they would refer to for ice cream. It's the name comes from the phonetic way of crème. And actually in the language today, ice cream is now kem, K-E-M. And so for us, this is kind of like a small tribute to our families and kind of preserving this moment of time. But also, ice cream in general is just, it's a word and it's a thing that triggers delight and joy, and it's also something we hope to kind of connect our customers and people to that same joy.
Well, I think Kaarem as a name for a fashion company works just fine, whether you know what its origins are or not. But if you know the backstory, then it adds just another dimension to the whole experience. And certainly that is true for those of us from a generation who can remember what Kaarem was supposed to mean. Now, I grew up in a Vietnamese refugee community in the 1970s and 1980s, and I have to say fashion was actually very important to us. Fashion, it seemed to me, was important to our refugee parents and grandparents. If you look at the black and white photos from Vietnam, everybody looks so fashionable, from their hair to their clothing. And then when we migrated to the United States, of course, there was a huge emphasis placed on survival and pragmatism, but people still looked good. I mean, from my memories of attending weddings and parties and things like that. And the youth, my generation, everybody was into their hair and their looks and their clothes and everything like that. So I have intense memories of the fashion of my parents' generation and then my own aspirations to fashion as an adolescent growing up. What were your first memories of fashion in your life, Kathy?
Yeah, so I mean, my first memory is probably one of my favorite things to do was to go shopping with my mom at the San Jose flea market. We would go there for like the 10 t-shirts for $10 deals. And we would we'll buy so much. It would be to ship back like a box full of t-shirts to Vietnam several times throughout the year. This was like before we could even travel back to Vietnam. And if I was lucky, my mom would let me choose a t-shirt of my own. And of course they were adult sizes, and I would just belt them and wear them as a dress.
Wow, the San Jose flea market. We're from the same hometown of San Jose, Northern California, and the San Jose flea market. Right. Okay, so I have to say, and fashion is obviously a very, very personal thing. Long before we even get to the question of entrepreneurship and mass marketing and trying to sell things to people, fashion's a very personal thing, and it is your identity. You choose your fashion. And I remember as this Vietnamese refugee boy growing up in the 70s and 80s in San Jose, California, what I really wanted to look like were what we in the community called the new wave kids.
Mm-hmm.
Vietnamese refugees, they come as adolescents. They're trying to make their identity here in the United States. They've been dislocated from the youth that they knew in Vietnam, and they come here to the United States and they are listening to new wave Euro disco music from Italy and Germany. They have exaggerated hairstyles. They have these exaggerated fashions. I wanted to look like that. And with my first money of my own that I'd saved up for my summer job, I went out to Macy's and I bought a pair of checkered pants pants. I brought them home, and in the fashion of the 80s, you rolled them up tight at the ankle. My mother saw this, and her reaction was, "You're turning to evil, because you're becoming one of these new wave kids who smoke and hang out, and they're going into the direction of gangs and drugs and all of that." And she made me return the pants. So for me, fashion was associated with rebellion and coolness and becoming American and separating from my parents. But it doesn't sound like that is what fashion meant to you. That fashion for you personally seems like it's actually something that brought you closer together with your family.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I definitely remember back to like the new wave. I grew up on like Asia and Paris by Night, and I would like love all the music, all the performances, and I actually thought like that was Vietnamese music. It wasn't until like a lot later that I realized like, oh, they're covers to to like, new wave music, and so but no, I remember always seeing how all the singers were dressed, and it was always so exciting for me. And for my mom, like one of her jobs coming to America was, we would pick up large trash bags full of fabric. She would sew her piece at home, and of course it's like an entire family effort. I would help her trim the threads and pull the elastic through the small openings, and if I was again lucky, my mom would take the leftover scraps and make me my own outfits, and definitely inspired by all this like new wave music going on. But yeah, from then, like my mom eventually taught me how to sew. So in high school, like I would make my own like reconstructed t-shirts, make some of my dresses. If I can't buy something, I'm gonna make it. And come later in college, I actually teamed up with my high school bestie and actually my now sister-in-law, and we started shopmycloset.com. And it doesn't exist anymore, and it was definitely the first of its kind, but it was where everything was like blog format. We would sell things that I sold and designed. We would sell our pre-loved clothing and like our thrift finds. And so so that's like my kind of my fashion, kind of journey. But then on the other hand, for me, it's very much driven by my family history and just experience, because like for me, like in early 90s, this is like early 90s, mid 90s, this is like for me, middle school. This was kind of like the rise of my peers, my classmates, like all of a sudden dropping out of school, joining gangs because, looking for another way to belong. And for me, it was just so frustrating because I didn't see like families, parents talk about it. It wasn't in the news. It was always about the great things that were celebrated, but never about the actual issues that are happening in our communities. And so in high school, I would organize a group called Vietnamese American Youth for the Future. So we would gather Vietnamese high school students from all over, different high schools together at the Asian Pacific Islander Family Center in San Jose. We would have a safe space to be able to just talk and discuss about all these issues facing in our communities. We would do stuff like watch like Buddha, a documentary, and so then come college, I found like another really strong grounding, which is meeting my cohort of friends who are now still my partners and my support system today. And I found my way as like a student organizer, really working within like the Southeast Asian community. But that was when I realized like, oh, I can use art as activism. And so for me, like that was like, oh, realizing how I can really start to kind of fuse and connect like all of my passions together. And this is kind of like for Kaarem today, it's basically the merging of these two passions into Kaarem. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is incredible. And I just want to, just say thank you for being such a trailblazer in this world. My partner too is very supportive of Kaarem. And we're working on getting me a few more pieces to rock and show off, especially around that, right? Because I think y'all's take on like the ao dai, like which is a very traditional, like the traditional image of Vietnamese culture, right, is quite different from how we might traditionally understand it. And I think, if you don't mind me asking, Kathy, if you could talk a little bit more about like the origins of Kaarem, right? I know y'all started in 2013 and y'all focus very particularly on the stitching, the materials, the structure of your fabric. If you could get a little bit into the details of, how, what were the conditions that Kaarem started in 2013 and where it's taking y'all now.
Yeah, so my partner Jung, like he actually left his job as a mechanical engineer in New York, and he moved back to Vietnam to kind of hone in his craft for draping and pattern making. And of course, he got that from his mom, who is still a seamstress today. And a couple of years after that, he asked me to join him to kind of create something. Uh, something in Vietnam for, with, and by Vietnam. And so at that time, it was like, oh, this is exactly what I've been dreaming of, right? It's like the opportunity to kind of build something across 2 continents, to be able to kind of connect people and stories and just possibilities, right? And connect people to the craft through designs and through this kind of platform. And so that's when we kind of decided Kaarem. We are both not traditionally trained as fashion designers. And so I actually studied architecture, and of course he's an engineer. And so we go at it very technically. And then so in terms of like our designs itself, it's actually about the construction of the design. So we're very much inspired by how an ao dai is crafted using the blind hem stitch, which is where no seams are visible on the exterior. It's something that it's really hard to come by nowadays. And so for us we started a small production studio manufacturing, and something we didn't have any experience with it. But it's kind of a blessing because we can kind of create it our own way, right? And so we kind of wanted to create like this a place where we can kind of preserve the traditional way of making ao dai, but with our modern silhouettes and styles. And so we started off with our production team. Our first hire was our pattern maker, Nguyen, and she's actually our 3rd partner to the business today. And we started off with 1 to 2, and now we have a team of 22 cutters, pattern makers, sewers, handcraft, and we're located in Bataan district, just actually 3 blocks away from where my dad grew up. So it's kind of like our commitment to preserving this craft and kind of like incorporating these like Vietnamese like inspiration into our designs.
If you're joining us now, my name is Viet Nguyen. I'm the co-host of Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, along with my fellow co-host, Philip Nguyen. We're speaking with Kathy Minh Bach, the fashion entrepreneur and designer and co-founder of Kaarem. Now, Kathy, you've been talking quite a bit about Vietnamese fashion, especially something called the ao dai. Now, if you're Vietnamese, everyone knows what an ao dai is, but maybe you can describe for us, to our non-Vietnamese audience, what is an ao dai?
So an ao dai is a traditional Vietnamese dress that has been gone through many, many stages and developments over the century. And for us, what we really we're inspired by it, mainly by the construction of the ao dai, more so than the silhouette. And not just the ao dai that inspires us, is actually also just the concept of how Vietnamese women dress. The idea of đồ bộ, which is like sets, and then the áo bà ba, which is like a domin shirt. And so our collection is actually using the construction techniques of an ao dai, but the design aesthetic and concept of đồ bộ separates, where you can wear a set together, but you can also mix match to kind of create endless possibilities. And you can wear it out to a wedding, but you can also wear it at home, cooking, to sleeping. And so we just love that idea of versatility, and we kind of carry it throughout our collection throughout the years.
Well, that's so interesting. So the aoyai is composed, if I have this right, of two pieces. One are the long pants that go all the way down to the heel, and the other is the top, which, depending on the style, extends to the wrists, goes up to the neck, and is very form-fitting, and extends to about the knee, with slits up the side to about the waist. Now, I'm not a fashion designer, so I could be totally mangling this description. Please correct me. But it's a very traditional and national form of dress, mostly identified with Vietnamese women. And there's a lot of legend and lore around the beauty of the aoyai and the beauty of Vietnamese women who wear it. But I think there's also a perception that it's very traditional. You wear it for weddings, you wear it for special occasions, and so on. And it's also associated, again, more with women than with men. In the modernization or the westernization of Vietnam, men started to wear suits, for example, but women always wore the aoyai in public. And I'm wondering where you see Kaarem's mission in regards to that, because you seem to be saying you want to actually take the aoyai away from its traditional context, or not completely separate it, but to give people the opportunity to wear it in different contexts than they might otherwise think of it.
Yeah, I mean, for aoyai, we definitely, the way we design our aoyais, it's not form fitting at all. I think form fitting is fairly newer, maybe 50s, 60s. Our aoyais are actually very inspired by like a century ago. It's fitted at the shoulder and it just drapes on your body. So it's like there's no form fitting at all. But it naturally drapes. And for aoyai, the way we see it is we love it to be an everyday thing. We love it for people not to have to wait for an occasion to wear an aoyai. We love to be able to design comfortable aoyais where people feel good in it and they can wear it at any point. And so that's kind of our kind of vision for where we're going with the aoyai. And again, with the concept of like nobo, like, you know, it's just the pairing of the dress and the pant is like very, you'll see that on throughout like our imagery and our websites, like we're very much all about that.
And I have to speak as someone who has never worn an aoyai, even to my own wedding. You know, I was like, no, I'm not going to do that, okay, because of all of the connotations that I just described. And I was like, I'm a new waiver. I'm not going to wear aoyai. So I'm glad to know there's such a thing as a comfortable aoyai, because they never look very comfortable. But you've been focusing a lot on aoyai for women, but do men also wear the aoyai in Vietnam?
Yeah, we actually design unisex aoyai, and we have quite a lot of customers. And so hopefully you will be in one soon.
A subtle plug, a subtle plug.
If I can get a custom fitting, maybe I will. Yeah.
You know, but we can probably bring Viet to to Saigon or to California or to New York where y'all are based, right, Kathy? So I mean, like, you know, that return, because I mean, where are you now? Are you stateside or are you in Vietnam?
I'm in Santa Barbara, California. I just moved here over a year ago from New York.
I see. Okay, so where does your work happen? And I also want to ask, you know, as you were talking about how your fashion journey and your family history kind of go parallel to each other, you know, for your parents and for the folks that came here as refugees, right? Like, what was that experience like to return to Vietnam and like work in Vietnam and kind of be in this in between?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, my first time back in Vietnam was 92. And at that time, I was very into watching like Hong Kong cinema and Taiwanese soap operas, but they were all dubbed in Vietnamese. So I actually thought they were all Vietnamese. And so when I went to Vietnam, I was actually very shocked because it was, you know, at that time, no toilets, you're sleeping on tables, there's mosquitoes, the heat, just everything that was not in the movies. And, you know, and I think part of that was, you know, my parents did not provide any context. They did not speak about anything of the past, right? And so later on, when I was 18, I got to do like a study abroad program with Professor Jung Chung at San Francisco City College. And that was an amazing experience because it was, you know, I'm going with professor, and he's explaining the historical context and just the history behind everything. And we kind of was able to kind of go through like 40 different cities and towns in a period of like a winter break. And so he's actually still a mentor and friend of mine to this day. But ever since then, I ended up studying abroad in Vietnam again, but in Hanoi. And after college, I would go back to Vietnam almost like every year. So for my parents, it's like no surprise. Like I was, in love with Vietnam. And and that's also part of another reason why I was very driven to kind of start this project and this business, to have this opportunity to constantly be reconnected to Vietnam, have an opportunity to be there, and to kind of continue to kind of build this connections between like, here and there.
And then I want to ask you, like, what's it been like to, be in this global or go global or be in this global space? Because I know that for Kaarem, right? And for the folks listening, this is Philip Nguyen. For Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, we're in conversation, my co-host Viet Nguyen and I, with Kathy Minh Bach, who is one of the co-founders of Kaarem, which you can find more information about by visiting kaarem.com. Your work, Suboy Warrior work for one of her music videos, Bet On Me, right? I'm looking at your website. Dolly Ab, who's another up and coming artist, musician, is also featured in your latest editorial, right? So where do you sort of see how you fit in terms of the diaspora or your positionality contributing to the look of this new generation of diasporic Vietnamese, Southeast Asian culture?
Ooh, okay.
A big question, but
yeah, I think, I think like many other Vietnamese in the diaspora, I think especially younger folks, everyone's kind of looking to connect to their roots, to understand, to learn, to find something that perhaps, perhaps they did not get that information from home or from school, right? And so I feel like there's, I guess in a way, like Kaarem is that space, and I'm trying to do that, and it's through designs and it's through a physical space. We have a physical space in Saigon, but we're trying to connect people to these stories, to each other, to the craft and to Vietnam, right? But it's, through actual products and actual like storytelling through the products. And I only hope that like it resonates with people, and also with people not, not a Vietnamese identity. For instance, like, our customers are from all over, and they feel so good in it when they wear Kaarem, right? They might not know about all the intricate details that we go into making the product and how we set up our production system, our team, right? But when they wear it, like the only hope we have is that they can feel it, right? They can feel that it feels different. And we hope that they'll start to explore, they'll start to question, look at the seams like, oh, this is like handmade, this is like hand stitched, and start to kind of want to investigate that a little bit more. So yeah, hopefully conversations can start then.
When I hear you talk about these different audiences for your work, it reminds me of challenges that all of us face who are creative people, but who happen to be of a so-called minority background. One of those challenges is, who is our audience? Is it people like us, or whatever that means, our so-called minority community, or is it a broader community? How can we speak to both audiences at the same time? Is it possible? What kind of challenges are put before us? I'm kind of curious, I'm very curious how that works out in the world of fashion in particular. You have a base in Vietnam, you have a base in New York City, you have Vietnamese customers, you have non-Vietnamese customers. Do you think that your designs are designed to be understood in just one way, so that it's just one kind of consumer and wearer? or do you think that Vietnamese people are getting something different from this than non-Vietnamese people?
You know, I think the way that June, Quing, and I go about designing is we honestly just stay true to ourselves, you know, what our values are. And we're not really thinking about the audience as much. It's easy to kind of get caught up, like, and so we realize like if we just stay true and have that grit, that resilience, which is, you know, very much part of the Vietnamese identity, you know, then eventually we feel like, you know, people will come. You know, this is our 10th year. And many people actually don't know about us because, well, one, we haven't done any PR, but, but, you know, I think it's just like, as long as we stay true to ourselves, like we'll be okay. One of the advantages of not being not coming from a traditional fashion industry background is that we didn't have those in our heads that we have to like follow. Like, so when we created our business from day one, we did not follow any traditional fashion industry standards. We went like trade shows. We did not do trade shows. Instead, we like showed at our friend's house. And this was at a time when there was no such thing. There wasn't Airbnb. Like it was strange to ask a buyer to come to a home. But you know what? We were able to kind of like offer them our food, right? Take off their shoes and actually have conversations with them about why we're doing this in the first place, right? And so I think building those strong relationships where, you know, at a trade shows, store buyers don't really get that experience, you know, we were able to kind of like grow organically and partner with like the right people to kind of help us also create our sustainable business, right? You know, we've always, you'll see all of our imagery since day one is that we've worked with primarily BIPOC models and, you know, featured BIPOC folks, you know, and a lot of Vietnamese folks. And so that was like from day one where, you know, in the beginning, we would get a lot of, you know, feedback like, oh, why don't you choose this model? And you know, that's not Vietnamese. And, or why don't you do this way? Or, oh, I think your clothes would do really well in Japan. And so these are all these like comments that we would always have to kind of filter out and just continue doing what we do because, you know, we believe in it, you know, and people will like it, people will come to it. And we just hope that along the way, they get to discover more stories, you know, within, you know, the fabric. So, yeah.
That's really inspiring. But I am curious about the economics of what you've laid out. You have a brand that's very authentic, that's very true to your vision. You're doing hand stitching, you're doing sustainability, and yet you're also resisting whatever the trends are or the normative standards are in the fashion industry. What kind of challenges arise for you to try to do all these things at the same time?
It's hard. We're very much embracing slow fashion. We're very small. We're very small, and you know, the way we've grown has always been kind of organic. You know, as we grow, we'll take that to then keep growing, and everything has been kind of like bootstrapped by us and our team. It's definitely a different conversation now because it's like, you know, pandemic has kind of changed everything, and we're actually still trying to figure out how to adapt to this like changing retail landscape, you know. But I think again, like it's in our blood to be resilient and have that grit. And so, but yeah, part when you had mentioned about like I think part of like our way of also sustaining the brand and the production is the way we go about designing, right? So back to like the double concept, like the separates, right? So if you really look at our collection, we thrive on our core collection. It's like 60-70% of it is styles that we've had since day one. Like, so for us, that's our part, our responsibility in terms of how to be sustainable, right? Not to get into this cycle of like having to constantly design new. But because we're able to kind of have this core collection that's been with us for 10 years, you can imagine that it keeps us sustainable in terms of cost, but also production, right? We're able to kind of like do what we're doing and do the craft that we're doing because of like these small business decisions. So yeah, like all these little like business decisions that we've made along the way.
Yes, thank you, Kathy, for walking us through your own personal growth as well as the growth of this fashion house that you've co-founded in Kaarem. One last question to you before we wrap on up is, what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself or a young fashion designer?
I would say for young designers, I think it's very important to find your voice, your perspective, your values, and stick to them. I think one of the great things about being a designer, being a business owner, is that every little decision you make, small or big, at every single part, layer of the business, does like affect change, right? And so if they just keep that with them, and I think if most designers kept that with them, I feel like there would be very, great things like happening in the world.
I'm Viet Nguyen, co-host of Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. I've been hosting the show with Philip Nguyen, and we've been speaking to Kathy Minh Bach, fashion designer, entrepreneur, co-founder of the brand and company Kaarem, Kaarem, a brand based in both the United States and Vietnam. It's just been really exciting talking to you and hearing about your convictions and your passions and your advice that people, no matter what they're doing, but here in this case, fashion design and fashion entrepreneurship, that people need to stay true to their vision and their inner calling and not to the demands of the market. Kathy, it's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.